Hi, I'm Leslie Helpert, and the following is part of a series called The Mechanics of Self-Trust. If you don't have the entire series of nearly 20 conversations yet, you can get them all for free by simply going to dynamicvoicetraining.com/conversation series.html. That is dynamicvoicetraining.com/conversation series.html. Thanks so much. Enjoy.
I'm so thankful to have Josh Whiteley here with me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Josh is somebody that I had the amazing pleasure of getting to meet when I was recently in Tucson, Arizona. And I sought Josh's space, his community acupuncture clinic out. And I was so floored with the experience that I had, and then researched a bit about Josh's work in the world, and was really thrilled when he agreed to come and speak to us today, or to share in this conversation on the mechanics of self-trust. So I'll just give a little bit of an overview of what you do in the world, and then we'll take it from there. Josh, for the last couple of decades, has been schooled in Ayurvedic medicine, and somewhere along the journey dove deeply into Chinese medicine as well, and so has a beautiful full spectrum of offerings between these traditional medicines, and holds fantastic space in his community acupuncture clinic for anybody who's really seeking support. A super accessible and gorgeous space, and as well is an Ayurvedic practitioner and helps people with all areas of their life through these traditional methodologies. So I'm really interested to kind of talk to you today to understand, firstly, how you trusted your path as a healer, and when you kind of woke up to that, and how you went toward it, and even like what for you did it sate? Like, how did you know it was right for you, and what was that journey like?
It's an interesting way to frame it. To be completely frank with you, I think my journey to trusting has been not trusting. And it's been, actually, I'll show you this too. Funny enough, so when I was about 17 years old, I got that tattoo on my wrist. And granted, it's a little bit of a bad translation, but what it means is have faith in yourself, trust yourself, right? And a big part of my journey has been not trusting myself. And I'd say probably to a large degree it still is. It's been a constant refinement of what it means to trust myself, trust who I am, trust what I want to do in this world, trust what I find value in. It's been a struggle. That's how I've learned to trust myself, or I'm learning to trust myself, I should say. So some of these things have been very apparent to me. I've had these moments where I think we probably all have, where you feel something and you just know it to be true, right? And there's the voice that tells you that, sort of, and there's the voice that kind of doesn't believe it. Ayurveda was a big one of those things for me. So I became a massage therapist when I was in my early 20s. It was pretty much my first real kind of career job. I'd done the bagging groceries thing and all, a couple other jobs like that. But it was the first time I felt like I'm choosing to do something that's meaningful to me. And it was a really profound experience, and that it kind of opened up my world to all the other things out there that I hadn't known about. I grew up in suburban Las Vegas. I didn't have much experience with these types of things. My family wasn't like an alternative medicine type of family or anything like that, right? So these are all brand new things to me. But there was something in my gut that just, as soon as I was exposed to it, I kept just finding myself drawn back towards it. So I was a massage therapist for a few years. I kind of stumbled across Ayurveda, and there was a book, Radical Healing by Dr. Rudy Ballantyne, that was got into a lot of these modalities aside from his Western medicine practice, that I just kind of went, wow, this is out there, huh? I've always been a curious person, and I've always explored things. So it was just an avenue I kept pursuing and kept studying. Ayurveda in particular, for some reason, just kept coming to me. And I kept being exposed to resources that were Ayurvedic things, and I kept studying on my own until the time I decided to go to school to study it. I decided, you know what, I need to do this. I considered a couple of different schools around the country. I went to go see Dr. Lodz, Vasant Lodz. He's an Ayurvedic doctor in Albuquerque. And I went down to do like a weekend course with him just to get a sense of what it was like, to feel everything out. And I just was in tears, literally. And it felt like the most, I knew it was an experience I had to do. I just had to do this. And being with him, you know, aside from being a brilliant person and a brilliant practitioner and clinician, he's somebody that for me lives this kind of truthfulness in his day-to-day life. And it's somebody that I really admire for that reason. And that's something that I think is, you just feel when you're around somebody like that, right? That's just something, it's embodied. It's not forced. It's not a put on. It's just there. And he had that effect on me. And I would go to see him lecture, and sometimes he would talk about medicine, and sometimes he would just talk about life. And either way, I was learning from him. I often think about it as a way as like this transmission would kind of worked, right? So things just sort of percolated through me, you know? I mean, I studied and I had to learn and do work, but I've never had that experience sense of things just sort of, it was almost like a remembering, right? So it's kind of like, oh, of course that's how this is. And this makes so much sense, right? So there's something there about trust. And I try to go back to those moments. And in the moments in life I have that feeling, that intuition, I'm trying to remember those as much as I can. And in one sense, I could say that's instinctual, but I think it's actually more of an intuition. And I think the difference is that instinctual, to me, I related that a little bit more to like a reaction, or it's something that happens outside of yourself and you're reacting to it. Where your intuition is kind of that true voice that's within you that's saying, yes, this is who you are. This is what will help you grow. So studying with him, studying Ayurveda was that process for me. I then went on to study Chinese medicine. I had a very dear teacher who I love so much named Dr. Claudia Welch. She specializes in women's health, brilliant person in her own right, who advised me to go on to study Chinese medicine. As I was nearing the end of the Ayurvedic program, there's not an ability to be licensed in Ayurveda in the States. So it's a lot of practicing in gray areas. And I knew I wanted to practice. I like clinical work. I like working with patients. I wanted to bring down as many barriers to doing that as possible. So she had recommended that I go through a Chinese medicine program. I was looking at, naturopathy and all these different types of things. And she said, do this. You'll get the clinical experience. You'll get the licensure. There's enough connections of these sciences that you'll be benefited by doing this in your Ayurvedic practice as well. So really on that much advice, I went to study Chinese medicine, and I knew I would like it. I like medicine, so I knew it wasn't a stretch to do this, but it was certainly a jump into the unknown. And that's one of those moments I look back on and I say, how did I feel in that moment? When she was saying that to me, and I felt this truthfulness about it. It wasn't a desire in a way of like, yes, I want to get this thing. I want to attain this thing. It felt like, yes, this will help you come more into who you are by doing this process. So I did it. So I've since been practicing Chinese medicine as well. I almost dropped out actually my first semester. I didn't understand the theory. It seemed backwards. It seemed like everything was opposite Ayurveda, and I just had my bias. And it really took me getting into the clinical piece of it and practicing acupuncture to really recognize like, oh, I do really like this, and appreciating the many beautiful things about Chinese medicine and acupuncture. So it was a slower growing love for me, but that love developed. So getting back to about trust, I feel like it's a process that we each have to go through, and we can read books about it. We can hear people speak about it. I can tell you my experience, but at the end, we each have to figure out what that pathway is for each of us to find that trust. And how do we know when we're trusting something truthful? And how do we know when we're just seeking something or wanting or desiring something, right?
So when we're saying the word trust here, coming from this incredible kind of interwoven traditional medicinal perspective that you have as a practitioner, how do you understand now what trust is?
Well, I think we can look at that in a couple different avenues. There's a trust that comes as a practitioner in the patient's potential to heal. the potential of acupuncture or Ayurveda to heal. And that to me is actually a little bit of stepping back and stepping away. I found over the years, the more I get involved in that process, so the more I try to insert myself in that process, I often find myself on that roller coaster of either feeling like I'm doing great. I'm a pretty damn good practitioner. And look what I did. I helped this person heal, right? That's always inevitably met with the crash when you get the person who you think you're going to help and you just can't do squat for them, right? So when you ride that roller coaster of inserting yourself in there, I think it brings you a less accurate sense of the process of healing. And it puts you a little bit more in the driver's seat than you should be, is my personal opinion. I think that it also, this is getting a little bit woo-woo, but from a karmic perspective, the more we tend to hang on to things, for good or bad, we take on those kind of karmic things too, right? So I remember reading a number of years ago a book called Agora, which is a really intense book, beautiful book, about the karma of being a practitioner. That in a way you can view this as you're benefiting from somebody's suffering, right? You're taking money for somebody's suffering, right? So there has to be a karmic exchange there, right? So even though it's like something benign we're doing, or if your intention's good and you want to help, right? There's still an exchange happening there. So the more you can involve yourself in that, pray to whoever you pray to, that you can do your best to just be a facilitator and a conduit, and to not take on neither the credit for it and hopefully not too much of the blame, and just allow yourself to be a channel. I found you become a much more effective practitioner that way. The patients tend to heal better that way, and you don't get that. A lot of practitioners talk about the drain, the energy sucking that a lot of massage therapists feel, or any kind of practitioner, right? The less you identify with your role in that, the less you're going to feel those things, is my experience.
Yeah. I also wanted to go back to like your original story around kind of going from Ayurveda into Chinese medicine, and even the resistance there, and your two teachers. I love that your second teacher that you referenced suggested that you take on Chinese medicine. And I wonder if somehow in doing that helped soften bias toward one medicine and allowed you to have some sort of multidisciplinary approach to the potential of healing, that you could kind of cross-reference and open your mind even more to possibility.
Right. Yeah. And and part of that's very fun, because in a way I look at that as like having different lenses to look at, a person through, right? I can look at things through more of a Chinese medicine type lens, or I can look at it through more for an Ayurveda lens. And that process is something that I think just becomes more intuitive over time. And in a way, I feel like the person starts telling me what lens I need to be using, or whoever, some higher power, right? So it's less of a thinking process for me, and it's more of like, well, of course we need to do some Ayurvedic treatments for this. We have this and this kind of thing happening, right? Or of course we need some acupuncture for this. That certainly happens. I've been thinking about this a lot too lately. With any type of practice we get into, we build our barriers. We build our definitions of what that means. I was an Ashtanga yogi for a long time, right? There's a certain set of rules. No matter, when you go into one system, there's a certain set of rules, and you're unable to see outside of that box. You can only see what's in front of you. And as painful as it can be, sometimes stepping completely out of that box and getting into another box gives you another angle on that. I was talking to a patient the other day, they were a yoga practitioner, like this very strong physical practice. They were very fit and toned, very kind of type A, right? And I was talking to them. I had recommended they try some yin yoga, which is kind of the exact opposite. It's very slow. You lay on poses for, minutes upon minutes, no sweat, and they were resistant to that. They tried it and they found a new understanding of their original Ashtanga practice, right? So being able to be adaptable, I guess is the word I'm looking for, right, is a very helpful skill in many facets of life, not only as a medical practitioner, but as a human being, right? So when we can start to see things from different angles, and that even comes back a little bit to trusting ourselves and who we truly are. If we're centered enough in ourselves and in our true higher self, we can also step outside of that and look at, well, what's another way to look at this? What could another possibility? That person screamed at me. Are they just a jerk, or what's maybe going on for that? If you can identify less with your perception of yourself that's one way to get outside of yourself as well. So that's a deeper level of self-trust, in my opinion.
Yeah, you just sort of gave me a realization in saying that, how much we can identify with actually what we're resisting. Like, this is who I am because I don't do that, and I don't do this, or I have to do this if it keeps me. I know for me, I've gotten in that, which I never thought I would. When I was like 20, I was like zero resistance, and who would have thought that by 40 I'd be like a rigid, have rigidity. And I think that's such an interesting piece too around, like, is it trust that we're moving toward, or is it fear that we're feeling into? It feels like your calling comes from a place of such ancient medicine that it doesn't surprise me that perhaps growing up in suburban Las Vegas, there wasn't really that much opportunity for you to find that place of resonance, that place that maybe your first teacher kind of gave you that sense of, yes, this is a yes for me. And it almost gives me a sense that when we can't feel that sense of that feeling of trust, that it's actually part of our beautiful journey and our path to keep going until we find that place where we do get that sense of belonging or connection, where we can have a healthy attachment and create healing in that space.
And there's many tools we can also use to assist ourselves in that process, right? And a big one is surrounding ourselves with people. This would be a good experience, a good example with Dr. Lad, my Ayurvedic teacher, right? So somebody who, in my view, is established in himself, being around people like this gives us a deeper sense of what that must be like. So spiritual teachers and things like that, right, are people that when we're around, we just feel this sense of there's this groundedness in them that also then becomes a mirror of us. We see that in them, and it helps us self-reflect on ourselves and at least seeking that quality out, right? And we all flounder and we feel it for a minute, we're excited and we're doing it, and then it drifts away. And we just keep coming back to that and keep bringing ourselves back to people like that as a way of surrounding ourselves with a community that supports us being in a deeper awareness of ourselves and who we are. And the flip side of that, of course, is, if we start surrounding ourselves with people who take us away from that, or, pull us into other things, that's going to be a distraction. So we're so influenced by who we're around, the people that we bring into our lives. So I think that's such an important piece of this. We talked about it before, but I think the breath is always a big gateway to this too. And whether we're doing pranayama, yogic pranayama exercises, or whether we're just doing simple deep breathing. We talked about, doing a 4-breath inhale with a 7-breath exhale, and just doing a cycle of 7 to 10 breaths even. It just takes a couple of minutes. It's one way to really ground us. In our modern world that sends us all over the places, and we have our phones and our computers, and there's so much information that acts up there, and there's so many exciting things, and there's now a lot of terrible things, and there's a lot that's pulling us outside of ourselves and trying to ask us to not identify with our true self, right? Breathing is a gateway to that. One of my other teachers always says this saying that where the breath goes, prana flows. Mm-hmm. So if we slow that process down, we center our prana in that way, right? So if I can only have maybe 1 or 2 things to recommend, it would be that is a breathing practice, surrounding yourself with good people who are supportive of that process for you. And I like gratitude a lot, and finding gratitude in your life. I found that so cheesy. I couldn't get with it. I just couldn't do it. Or I should say, I told myself, yeah, I know what that means. I know how to be great. Okay, I get it, right? Be grateful, right? I've seen those posters on the wall, right? But I started a practice of writing down my gratitude, a gratitude journal. As cheesy as that is, yep, I had one. And I'll write out 10 things I'm grateful for. And some days I can be in a really bad mood about it. I can say, whatever. And it's almost a little bit tongue-in-cheek, right, what I'm writing. But then I go back and reflect on that. And even that brings a deeper level of gratitude. I see I was kind of being a little bit flip about, being grateful about having my favorite green t-shirt on or something, right? But I say wow, that's actually, I do actually feel good. And the process of writing that out on paper is also a medicine. That's why journaling is such a powerful medicine too. There's studies about the process of writing something out by hand is a much different process than even typing on the computer. So I always encourage people to write these things out. this changes the chemistry of our brain when we practice showing gratitude for things. And you don't have to show this list to anybody else in the world. It can just be your list. Some people, if you live alone, you can post that on the fridge because it's nice to see, you know, right there in front of you. But that's a big, big way to get a deeper sense of yourself, is by understanding what you're grateful for.
Getting the opportunity to go inside and to find a place of resonance inside is really how we develop trust, really taking time to go inside of ourselves. So
Right.
is it helpful to have sort of like rhythm in when we take time to, you know, for example, meditate or do our gratitude journal entry?
Very much. And that's a really big component actually in Ayurveda is ritual and routine. So there's the term vata, which we could equate to maybe like a wind type energy, a frantic type energy, which is a very common thing in modern life, especially, right? Everything's very moving faster. Everything's go, go, go. Bringing some type of routine into your life is the best medicine for that. So if we want to ground our vata, we bring routine into our life. I often recommend people do these practices in the morning. Is the best time to do them, for very practical reasons and kind of more etheric reasons, right? But the time of sunrise especially is called the ambrosial hour. Brahma Muhurta is the term for it, the Sanskrit term. And this is a time when the energies in the universe, if you want to go there, are particularly right for this type of practices. So that's why a lot of spiritual practitioners get up at the crack of dawn and do their practices right at sunrise, right? The sandhi, or the joint of the day, is most right for this type of change to take place. So I often think doing your practices in the morning is best. It also doesn't give you the excuse later on in the day to run out of time and not do them. So we can always say, yep, I'll do my yoga or I'll do my meditation later. I got stuff to do. We all know how that can turn out quite often. So I think setting a routine of regularity for these type of practices is a wonderful way to make them become more, to bring you more stability and firmness in actually doing your practices. I also think, you know, we live in the practical modern world. The only time you got, you know, you have kids and you got a job, 8 o'clock at night's the one time you can meditate at 8 o'clock p.m., right? Doing some practice is better than no practice. But I certainly have found if you can set a routine, you'll get into that rhythm and it'll become natural. It'll shift the way you view it too. It won't become a chore. It'll just be something you do. It's the same way you brush your teeth, right? You wake up, you just brush your teeth, right? So you wake up, get on your mat, meditate, or do your yoga practice, do your gratitude list, whatever it is. That's the best chance of it happening most consistently. It's been my personal experience, and most of my patients have that same experience too.
I kind of want to think about when you're doing acupuncture and someone comes in and you read their pulse, and when I came into your space, it's so glorious. I want to just describe it for people who haven't experienced it around the world. Even though I think some of the most beautiful things are hidden gems in the world, I think that your space everybody in the world would benefit from having the chance to come into the Common Roots Acupuncture Clinic. And I've been in a lot of group community acupuncture spaces, and this one is just so special. It's really almost like entering in a cave of art, of possibility. It's this very clean space with this beautiful trifecta of rich, nourishing music, and your graceful, kind of connected awareness to all of the different people who are in your space, getting treatment, and then this just lovely kind of vintage, beautiful gallery-like building. And it's super unusual. It's almost like going into sort of like an art gallery and getting to relax in this really soft, personal chair. And just the music itself, I mean, that enough just to like lay back and take in the hot desert, especially in Arizona, just to have, you know, anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour or longer to be in a chair, just being in that space is so healing. It's just incredible. As soon as I walked in, I just could feel exactly what you said when you walked into your first Ayurvedic teacher space, that place of, oh, this is a container. This is a place where I can come into myself in collective space. Now, our world, as we know, is only beginning to, in modern time, foster more and more places where we can stay in our sense of self and be interacting in the world at the same time. I think that as far as even like finding community and finding connection with each other, space can really foster that, can make or break that. Wow. So, I mean, and I know that architecture and art and placement, and even from a Vedic perspective, is really important to you. And you just did a great job creating an expression of the healing space that you're providing. Acupuncture is such an art. It's really miraculous. And I just think that you definitely create this space of trust for people. For me, it was an incredible experience to get to go to your clinic multiple days in a row, and even to be able to feel like it was okay to sit in your space for more than an hour with needles in my body, just going into my patternations and pathologies, and sort of getting to do the healing work myself. And I really do think that's what you did. You really did, in a way, like stay out of it by completely holding space for it. And for me, that's very rare. It's something, even as a practitioner myself, that I'm thinking like, oh, how can I apply that more as someone who works with others' voices, you know, and their communication and stuff. All that being said, when someone comes in and you're listening to their pulses, I mean, listening in a way is a whole art form of trust. It's like how we infer, right? It takes kind of a deep listening to be able to listen to how somebody's system is operating inside of them. Can you describe a little bit about that whole experience?
Well, I look at it in a few different ways, like everything else. The process of taking someone's pulse, there's the diagnostic piece of that, right, that you learn in school, and how, you know, what this means, and what this little bump in the pulse means, and what that bump means, and what condition this might show is happening, or how the doshas are affected in this way. There's also the very simple piece of connecting with a person as an individual that I value so much in taking the pulse. To me, that's the first sort of way to connect with somebody, to kind of enter into their energetic space, so to speak, and to let them sort of enter into your energetic space, right? So in some ways, there's just a very physiological piece of just connecting with somebody, right? It's a vulnerable place to be in a healing space, right? And something that's really important to be in a space like that is trust. It's a nice way to help engage that process of trust happening. So some of that is just connecting with the person as an individual and saying, hey, I'm here. We're going to work together. Is that okay? You know, it's a little bit of asking permission of the body too, or of that person to engage with you in this kind of healing relationship. Pulse taking's an art and a science in and of itself. Dr. Lott, I asked him one day, I would watch him take pulses, and he would just find the most profound things about someone's entire medical history, their karmic history. I mean, these just layers of stuff that is unimaginable. And I asked him one day, and I was like, Dr. Lott, I see, you know, I'd like to be as good as you. How do I do that? And he said, and he's a very sweet, humble person. He always called me dear for some reason. And he said, dear, he said, you feel 10,000 pulses and then you'll be a beginner, you know? And I said, okay, so this is like a long time thing, huh? And he's like, yes, it is. So for me, also a big part of it has just been engaging in that process over time, and contacting pulses and feeling what a pulse feels like, and connecting what physiological state may be going on with the person, what mental emotional state might be going, and seeing what connections I find in that. So there's a number of different ways to look at the art of pulse taking itself. There is a science to it, and I was just teaching a class today about it. There's some clear and cut things. You feel a specific, you know, spike in the stomach area, and there's probably going to be some sort of stomach issue, you know, whether it's there's different ways to delineate it, but, you know, maybe an acid reflux, you know, irritable bowels or something like that, right? There's all these different ways we can look at it. And then there's the energetic piece, and you can read into that layer too. And as you get more intuitive with this process, that's where the intuition and the science start to meld. So it's a little less black and white at that time. And that's the point where I think that it's good to try to get to as a practitioner, of letting that speak to you, letting the body, letting the person, letting the spirit let you know how you can assist them. So you become even a little bit more passive in that process as you go along. Same thing with acupuncture points. You can get the textbook and it'll show you the measurements. It's the so many inches, or soon is what they call it, to find spleen 6. There's an intuition that comes. Once you know how to find an acupuncture point and feel an acupuncture point, you just know what an acupuncture point feels like, and you'll find them that way. So the body the body speaks, the body talks, the body communicates, and you just learn to listen. I don't know if that's answering any question at all, but.
Well, it's very fascinating. And yes, I mean, I think this is sort of like a kind of an ocean of conversation, and there's so much. I'm very, very fascinated with all of it. I really feel absolutely nourished by traditional medicines, and I really like how I don't feel like I'm being administered a prescription that's just homogeneously put on any person. It's like a one size fits all thing. So after you hear someone's pulse and you feel like you also like listen to what their complaints or their issues are, do you kind of like get a sense of the balance that they might be seeking and then help to like nourish to go toward that direction? How do you, without force, allow the body to find its own place of natural wellness?
Yeah, that's sort of in my mind a two-pronged process, and a big part of that process is back to trust. It's trusting the body's resources to heal itself. I view myself as essentially like, I don't know why I view this, but you know, when you get on a plane and there's the guy or the woman who stands out there and guides the plane, and they have the little orange things and they go, okay, this way, okay, now turn, now that way. That's my job. My job is to help give some guidance for where prana, where chi, where energy needs to flow in the body, right? I'm not the doer. I'm just a helper, right? I'm an assistant in that process. So I have to trust the body's innate intelligence to heal itself. And the body is a wonderful, miraculous thing, a mysterious thing. The more I think I'm learning about it, the less I think I know, and the less I think anybody really knows what's happening. But there's an innate intelligence to heal. The body wants to find balance. The body wants to come back to that stable state, right? So we can assist that process. In some forms of medicine, with medicine, we can really push it really strongly. But the strengths that I feel that Ayurveda and Chinese medicine have is that it helps to assist the body to find its own healing mechanism. And if that mechanism has become a little bit disabled for whatever reason, it helps to just bring that process back. It sparks the body's intelligence. The body knows what to do. I have that experience a lot with one of the beautiful things about these medicines, that you can correct one simple piece of the puzzle. Like you look at this cycle and say, oh, if we just did this, if we change the diet in just this way, or we just do this acupuncture right here, it'll correct this flow. The rest of the body can then heal itself, right? I've worked on something as simple as somebody's back pain, and they never mentioned that they didn't sleep good and had chronic insomnia. I didn't know they did. And they come back later and they're like, Josh, I forgot to tell you, like I've been a chronic insomniac. I sleep now. I didn't know that, So that shows that to me shows that the body can heal. The body knows what to do. Sometimes it gets a little off track and needs a little bit of guidance back to the areas and it would be helpful to go to. But essentially it's an innate intelligent thing.
Do you think it's possible that we can have a condition that's going on in our body and actually repair that pattern of energy flow without it returning? Or do we also sometimes have to change our behaviors and lifestyles or even our thinking in order to not fall into the same place again, where we're out of balance in a very similar kind of way? We're leaning on the right side until we kind of fix that posture, we'll keep leaning there. Is that something you see a lot?
Oh, of course, every day, right? So it's a medicine of probabilities in a way, right? So, I'm trying to think of a common example. Maybe somebody's works at a grocery store, right? Bagging groceries. I've been there. They're doing this repetitive motion, right? They get tennis elbow, which would be like a tendonitis in the tendon attachment right here. It gets inflamed, it hurts, it gets weak. It's a thing of overuse, right? We can do our things to it. We can administer anti-inflammatory herbs, acupuncture, some type of topical. We can tweak the diet a little bit in whatever ways might be helpful. If what they're doing is pushing harder than what we're trying to assist, right? You're kind of up against the wall in that way. So sure, sometimes the most beneficial thing would be for somebody to make a dietary change or make a lifestyle change, or maybe it's a postural change, right? We have to think with a lot of different lenses, what might be the most helpful path of least resistance to get them back to a place where they feel good. And sometimes we can do that. Sometimes it's a hand of cards you get, maybe a genetic component's just too strong in this case that we can't make it go away. But we can hopefully at least assist to make the quality of life a little better, right? So those cases happen. Ayurveda uses what they call samprapti, which is like a progression of disease, so to speak. So there's 7 layers to this. If we can intervene at the first couple layers, we can swing the boat back the other way much easier. Once you get to the more advanced layers, right, where disease becomes propagates in a way that might be too strong, maybe some cancers, some things like that. Some of the more westernized conditions, what we call, like, that's when Western medicine is trying to intervene, right? In Ayurveda, we're seeing it started way back here, trying to intervene at the end now, and that makes it a much tougher thing to do. Alzheimer's disease or cancer or things like this. So these very progressed, advanced conditions, right? Sometimes you get a win, and sometimes it's just too far along, too progressed to have enough time to reverse that process.
Yeah, this is something I love about traditional medicine, is it's listening to sort of like the state of wellness in the body before even a condition might present itself, and allowing that person, like you said, to come into their essence, to get to know their essence, to be who they are more fully.
Right.
And that's just really something that is unique to traditional medicines, I think, in some way. It's really about feeding that essence to let someone be who they are. So why do you think that so many of us struggle to freaking trust our body? Like, how many times, even for me, I've been doing like body-based connection work since I've been 18. And even sometimes still, I wake up and I'm like, yeah, today you really don't need X, Y, Z. And then like 30 minutes later, I've got X in my hand or something. Like, why is it that there's this resistance to just trust where the body is?
Well, I think that brings us back to the yogic concept of svadhyaya, self-study, right? So that is a continuous process. We've entrenched certain patterns and identified with certain patterns for so long. It's like we've carved out a Grand Canyon of patterns, right? So that canyon is deep. So to redirect the river flow takes some time and takes some changing of patterning. So ways we can do that, we can get, we can look at, why do we do that? But I think a more important question is what got us there in the first place? Like, that's the solution-based way to look at that, right? So what got me to where when somebody cuts me off in traffic, I go, ah! Or, when my mom talks to me in this certain tone that I've heard since I was a kid that has all these deeper implications that somebody else might not hear, but I hear. What got me to that point? What defense mechanism got me there? What patterning emerged? And that's what we do in Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, right? We're looking at the roots. There's a term in Chinese medicine, the root and branch, right? We can get hung up in the branches and just think, oh, I'm just in a bad mood, or she's just, that person's a jerk. We can get too hung up in that. I'm just moody. I'm just mean. I'm just sad, right? Instead of looking at the deeper, what pattern emerged to make this happen, and what purpose did that serve? And I feel that we often find those patterns no longer serve us, right? If we can really identify, like, that served me, shutting down emotionally when I was a kid because I had parents who were really intense and really on top of me. If I shut down, that was protective of me when I was a kid. It doesn't help me anymore, right? It doesn't allow me to engage in deep relationship with people, right? I shut myself off. I'm not going to be able to be involved in a deep way with people, right? So this is a practice we can constantly do. These patterns have been entrenched for so long. The mind works very, very fast. It likes to cover up these scary parts of ourselves, these shadow sides of ourselves. So we just have to accept that happens, and it happens to all of us. And we just have to start looking deeper within, asking these really important questions of ourselves. I just had a big example of it this past weekend, actually, right? So something happened. I went to logic brain. I went to, this makes sense in this way. And I thought I'm being honest. I'm being open. I'm talking. later on I went, oh God, I never even thought about what do I actually feel? Like that's a big thing to do, is to go to that feeling place. What am I actually feel like, regardless of the story, the circumstance, what am I feeling in this scenario? Like when we talk, what am I like feeling about this experience of connecting with you? Like, and I think that gets you to a more true place within yourself. And then you can ask the questions, well, if I'm, what is that feeling telling me? What am I supposed to be knowing about that feeling? And that often cuts out a lot of the periphery stuff just by doing that. Just that's one layer deep, and there's multiple layers deep you can go. Even getting under that one layer of a lack of awareness will bring us so much help, and so much more happiness, really. And even in the times if it won't bring happiness, it can bring acceptance, right? So if something, some things in life are just sad and hard and horrible and terrible and hurtful, and if we can see that for what it is, there's an old saying I like called "name it and tame it." I felt some shame, right? Just naming an emotion that came up for yourself takes away a lot of its grip on you. It puts it in a little bit of a more objective experience of that. And then you can say, oh, wow, I felt shame. And that's why I responded this way. That's why I did this. And you change in that way, right? When you reset these deeply entrenched patterns. And that just takes time, though. That's the hard work.
It can take time, and I think also it can take guidance, teachers, safe space, and some of us, have that at our access, and others don't even know how to begin to even know that they might need that, because we have so many different people and so many different situations in the world right now. That's one of the reasons too, I think, that it's so beautiful that you're offering in your community acupuncture space an opportunity for people to really have this healing experience in a space that feels so where they're being so deeply heard and taken care of and attended to at a price that's typically affordable for everybody. And you've even offered like these days of free service for people in times of crisis, and I think we really need that in the world more than ever. I mean, this feels now, especially during this period, we really need these kind of healing places where people can start to trust their body a little bit, where they can at least start to hear or be curious, to start being curious. Because I think too, like, this body is a symbol of our temporariness in this planet, and there's so many things that are put on our bodies around how we have to, maybe depending on who we are, look young forever, or there's such a focus on kind of not approaching death in our society, and yet we know that whatever life we have is being vesseled in this temporary container, and it feels so unpredictable. Our bodies can feel so unpredictable, and it's so difficult to even get a sense of what's going on the inside. We can look outside of ourselves and say, like, that's Bob and that's Joe, but it's so difficult to know, like, wait, where's my liver and what is it doing? And one of the things I love about Chinese medicine from my experience is like how poetic it is. Like the organs are paired, they have relationships. So, I know that I've gotten to ask you a lot of questions, so I won't ask you so many more, but I'd love to know your thoughts on, like, what is that pairing like? How are these organs trusting themselves? For example, the kidney and the heart. Like, can you talk a little bit about how Chinese medicine has these relationships of organs?
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating subject. It's also a mysterious subject. There's a lot of different opinions and thoughts on what these connections and why these connections. Some people have tried to piece it together in a more Western anatomical way and shown some connections. Some have done it more as an energetic thing. Essentially, in my mind, it just shows the interconnectedness of the body as a whole, right? So you can look at the pairing, like the lung and the large intestine are two paired organs. You can look at that as the Chinese medicine functioning of how those two organs operate together. And you can look at it also just as in the channel system itself. So all the meridians are linked to themselves, right? Or all 12 are essentially in one big loop. So by the time you get through all 12, it loops back around to the first one it connects. So sometimes you use that connection diagnostically. Sometimes you use it in the way you would treat which meridians you would choose to, treat. It's like say maybe your lung meridian is the one that's most affected, I might treat the large intestine meridian. And vice versa, right? So a lot of it comes down to just balancing channels as a pressure release valve of the other channel kind of thing, right? There's also the emotional connections of these organs too. So, the lungs tend to hold things like grief is a big emotion that's associated with that, right? So we might look at the lung possibly in terms of a physiological lung, maybe asthma, some kind of cough, right? Something like that. Or it may be deeply held, deeply seated grief, maybe the root of what we need to get at, right? So each of the organs have their energetic piece and their physiological piece. And the connections just show essentially the interconnectedness of the body itself. Each organ relies on one other organ or multiple organs to function properly, and each one can affect another one in a dysfunctional way also.
Are the meridians sort of in any way related to the nervous system? Is there a similar path, how the meridians flow through the body?
Right. Yeah, and this gets into trying to translate some of these ideas into more modern concepts. There is some evidence that the meridians go along nerve pathways. There's some theories about them running along actually like the fascia planes of the body. So in between each of the organs, they're covered in this kind of sheath, right? So some people think that that's kind of how this energetic piece is connected. Because obviously if you open up a body, you don't see these meridians, right? There's not the lung channel running just like this. But there are certain systems in the body on a physiological level that people have traced, and fascia lines is a big one. Nerves also, right? Sometimes if you prick an acupuncture point further up the arm, somebody will feel it down in their finger, and it'll be right along that lung channel. And that's always to me is a nice kind of revalidation of like, oh wow, there is a connection here. It's again one of those things I think the more we understand it or try to understand it, in some ways we learn more about it, in some ways we know even less about it. There's a little bit of magic to this that I hold on to, because there's just something in the body that we just don't fully understand. There's something about it that acupuncture is able to tap into that I don't think we'll fully ever be able to put on paper why it's doing what it's doing. Some fascinating studies, I've seen ones where they'll activate a point maybe on this point on the hand, large intestine 4, and it will light up a specific part of the brain that relates to the face. This is a big point for the face, right? So they were onto something, right? They'd figured these things out much before we were able to do MRI imaging of the brain while you're getting acupuncture. I always joke and say this is because they didn't have internet and TV and phones to check, to text each other on. So they had more time on their hands to figure stuff out like this, right? But it's fascinating. They clearly tapped into something, and it's also fascinating that many cultures around the world have similar practices where activating one part of the body will treat another part of the body. The Ayurvedic system has a system called marma, and it's for lack of a better term, Ayurvedic acupressure, right? So they'll use points along the body to activate an organ or a different part of the body to treat pain or some kind of disease or something like that, right? Native Americans had a system like that. There's since been, Vietnamese, Japanese. Everybody has different systems of this kind of treating the body by touching other parts of the body, which to me is a fascinating thread to see too.
And even in relationship to how important it is in realms of developing trust for us to have the opportunity to get to know ourselves. Like these traditional medicines, it makes sense that in the path of learning to trust yourself, you would go to these systems that are really about listening to the body and connecting all these parts of the body. It's so unique and so whole and full and ancient. So as far as people who aren't in Tucson and who want to get to work with you, you also do Vedic readings, deep in Vedic astrology, which is really cool. And I'm wondering if you see a kind of connection and even how that system is organized to other facets of Ayurveda. Are they very interconnected? Do you see that?
Very much. Very much. And it's kind of one of the curses and the blessings of all the Vedic sciences is, you have to find the fine line between diving in deep to one system and not understanding other systems, or They're so interconnected that it's almost, in my mind, a little bit essential to know at least a little bit about these different systems, right? So every Ayurvedic practitioner should know a little bit about Vedic astrology, a little bit about Vastu, which is like a Vedic feng shui system, right? And then, of course, the philosophical systems of Vedic thought and things like that too, right? Could spend lifetimes doing this. We probably have spent lifetimes doing this, right? So there's definitely a deep connection. Being that I like clinical practice, Vedic astrology, there's so many facets you can go into, but I particularly like doing medical astrology. I think it can give a lot of insights into conditions that may not be so apparent just from doing a purely diagnostic, intake, that kind of thing, right? Sometimes, it'll show karmic influences. It also can give you a sense of if somebody's having kind of a bad run of health, when that might change. You can look at future dates for that, and also when to be more careful, right, in the future. So yeah, you can integrate. From what I understand, these things used to be very integrated. They weren't separate systems, and then at a certain point, Ayurveda kind of grew into its own science. Astrology kind of grew into its own science, and they've come in and out of favor at different points. I find them both extremely helpful for all kinds of reasons and for different reasons too. So yeah, I like them both. Same with Vastu, which is Vedic feng shui, right? That's, to me, it's the yoga of space. So that's how I tend to think of it, right? So when we organize these spaces in ways that are conducive to our healing, conducive to our happiness, harmony amongst our families, or a business, if you want to make it more conducive to money and profit, things like that, right? The more things you can align in this way, the more these things will work together in a way that will be beneficial. So, and same with like yoga, right? So yoga as a physical practice, will help keep your body in better physical shape, right? It's also its own spiritual science too. So there's ways you can integrate all these things. You can bring Ayurveda into yoga. You can bring yoga into Ayurveda, right? There's a lot of cross-reference for sure.
Well, I love that you're offering so many of these expressions out in the world, and you really have gone to as far as you can, and even like studied with as many masterful people that you can, and that you keep learning and keep journeying. So if people want to access your work, set up a session to do Vedic reading, astrological reading, or also support with cleanse, right? Like you do that at a distance. Do you do that?
Yeah.
What other distancey things do you offer?
Well, so I have one website, which is rupaayurveda.com, RUPA ayurveda.com. That has mostly my Ayurvedic type practices. So I do a lot of distance, especially these days. I do Ayurvedic consults with people. I do Vedic astrology with people. I do Vastu Shastra with people. These can all be easily done over long distance, which is great. It's helped me connect with people around the world in ways I never would be able to. Acupuncture would obviously be, I haven't figured out how to do that over the internet yet. So if I've figured it out, I'll let you know. But as for now, Common Roots Acupuncture is my acupuncture clinic. And that's, for people in the Tucson area, I have a much better shot at getting that to happen. But I love talking to people all over the world about, Ayurveda is one of my big passions, and I kind of can develop it based on what the individual needs of the person. Some people need something maybe more astrology, some people need maybe more Ayurveda, some people need some of both, right? And then also I'll do the panchakarma cleanses with people too, and walk them through that process, give them the supplies they need. We'll kind of talk about what their goals are, and we'll do a diagnosis and that kind of thing too, to kind of set that up for them to be the most conducive way for them to do that. It's a little bit more affordable, than like going to India or something. So they can do this process themselves, and then they'll have my guidance to help them through that too. So.
Okay, well, I'll definitely put links to all of what you just shared, and I completely recommend that if anybody wants to do any kind of guided support in realms of their wellness through nutrition, through Ayurveda, through cleansing, or also get an assessment. Thank you so much, Josh, for spending time and doing this interview. I really appreciate your time and your work in the world.
Of course, thank you.